Why the discipline of economics depends on your worldview. In this second section, I'm going to present a very simple stylized diagram which shows why there are many different worldviews in economics and how these differences can fundamentally change the way we perceive the economy. It's going to be a bit of a whirlwind tour of different approaches to economic thinking, so get ready. Open almost any macroeconomics textbook and you'll soon find this diagram, known as the circular flow of goods and money diagram. What it shows is an economy with households and firms, and it depicts their interdependencies. Households supply firms with factors for production, their labour, their savings, and the rent of their land. And in return they receive wages, dividends and rent. And with that money they then buy goods and services made by the firms. And so it goes round, the money and the resources. Now, the concepts underlying this diagram matter because they provide the fundamental framework for national income accounting. That means assessing a country's gross domestic product, its GDP, and hence assessing its economic growth, which is the health of the economy, so often reported in the news. Now, this is just a very basic version of the diagram, and it traditionally gets extended in three ways, by adding in first the government sector, which raises taxes and then provides subsidies and public goods to households and firms. Second, the finance and banking sector, which was traditionally presented as a mediator of finance between savers and borrowers, but as recent events have demonstrated, its economic role and power extend far beyond that. And third, the trade sector, involving imports and exports and investments from other countries. There are many different branches of economics that focus on these different issues. Labour economics studies the dynamics of markets for waged labour, asking, for example, what's the impact of introducing a minimum wage. Public economics examines the role of government in the market economy, asking when should the government intervene in those markets and how. The economics of money and banking studies the role of financial institutions in the economy, asking questions such as how is money created and what role should the central bank play. International economics focuses on understanding the patterns of trade and investment between countries, asking when should countries practice so-called free trade and when should they use tariffs and other trade barriers. And one of the major debates in economic theory over many decades has been between Keynesians and the monetarists, debating the role and influence that governments can have in their attempts to steer the economy out of a recession or away from runaway inflation. So it would be possible to spend several entire careers in economics focusing on just these issues. And yet over the past 20 or so years, new economic worldviews have emerged which raise quite different questions. To explore them, let's go back to the most simple form of this diagram, the circular flow. This diagram presents only the factors of productions and the goods and services which are exchanged in the monetized economy. And if we think back to the definitions of economics concerning how people in societies choose to use scarce resources, then there are at least three other kinds of scarce resources that are significantly missing from this picture. First, the economy is not a closed circular system floating on a white background. It's deeply embedded in the environment, drawing in natural resources and putting out pollutants. Ecological economists such as Herman Daly and Robert Costanza have long pointed this out, arguing that the global economy is now so large and is affecting ecological integrity to such an extent that it makes no sense to present environmental degradation simply as a market externality. Addressing it is integral and fundamental to the resource system on which humanity depends. At the same time, our planet is sitting in a river of solar energy coming in and waste heat flowing out. And so the fundamental nature of energy requires economic theory to reflect the laws of thermodynamics and entropy. Second, as feminist economists such as Nancy Fulbright and Diane Elson have long made clear, not all labour that contributes to the monetary economy gets counted and paid, particularly work done in the unpaid care economy and mostly by women. And this woman has a bucket on her head because in many low-income countries, women provide not only the childcare and family meals, but the water and the firewood too, all for no pay. That work of raising children and running a household is essential for producing workers who are healthy and fit for work. And so it is effectively a workforce subsidy to firms. And if we ignore it in our economic analysis, we ignore unpaid goods and services which are actually fundamental to both our well-being and the economy. Third, theorists inspired by Pierre Bourdieu and Robert Putnam point out the importance of social capital, and this has created the study of socioeconomics. There are many goods and services created and exchanged within the community which are not part of the monetized economy, but which are highly valued, be it the intangible attribute of neighbourhood security, or the practical exchange in babysitting circles, or virtual communities that have created the huge resources of Wikipedia and open source software. Again, These are resources that contribute significantly to our social and economic well-being, but fall outside of the monetary economy. So with these three perspectives added, many new questions come into view. Let's start with the definition of economics as the study of how societies use scarce resources. If economists aim as they do to give policy prescriptions, then it's very important to ask, using scarce resources to what end? This brings the idea of goals back into the domain and definition of economics. Many heterodox economists argue that far from being value-free, mainstream economics has long taken economic growth to be its implicit goal. But instead, we need to be explicit about the question, and theorists such as Amartya Sen and Manfred Max Neef argue that the goal, rather than being economic growth, should be human well-being or human freedom. With that as the starting point, it's clear that the monetized economy contributes very significantly to human well-being, but so do the unmonetized resource flows, as you can see from all the arrows flowing into and out of the household. Hence, understanding their interactions between the monetized and the unmonetized matters. So what kind of economic system would best promote human well-being, and how could it be monitored and measured? The good news is that there are currently a lot of really interesting initiatives underway around this question of measuring human well-being, so helping to bring the discussion of economic goals explicitly back onto the policy table. If we focus in on the unpaid care economy, we can ask, how could unpaid care work be recognised by society, redistributed between women and men, and rewarded to reflect its value? And what could governments do to support that? Again, lots of interesting initiatives are underway in gender budgeting, or work by Oxfam conducting rapid care analyses, starting to change policy debates and indeed change worldviews in many countries. If we focus in on social exchange, we could ask, how could complementary currencies, meaning local currencies such as the Bristol pound, be introduced to help increase the flow of community exchange? There are some fascinating experiments and initiatives around the world showing the power of thinking laterally about what money is and how new currencies could be designed for social purposes. And then there's the question from ecological economics. How big can the monetized economy be in terms of its material resource use in relation to the environment? Is unlimited economic growth possible through absolute decoupling GDP from resource use on this finite and fragile planet? That's a crucial question to be asking, particularly in the 21st century, in the face of unprecedented environmental stress, particularly from climate change. And yet it's rarely asked directly in mainstream economics, because it falls outside of the mainstream worldview. Lastly, two further interesting critiques made of the mainstream. First, let's rethink human behaviour. Mainstream economic models have traditionally described people as perfectly rational, with perfect information about all products and prices, and individually formed preferences, acting to optimise their personal utility. But behavioural psychologists such as Daniel Kahneman have pointed out that we're not like that at all. We have limited information, we follow our habits, we follow the crowd, we can be nudged into action or inaction, and we're altruistic. We're not only competing, but also cooperating with one another. Behavioural economics asks how, then, economic theory and prediction changes when this far more realistic understanding of humans is brought into economic thinking. And likewise, let's rethink the firm. Far from operating in perfectly competitive environments, many firms actually operate in markets in which bigger firms gain greater market power. Think of the supermarkets. And so the business and economic landscape is shaped by history, by institutions, by influence. Far from being an equilibrium balance, the path of the economy is determined by evolutionary processes where power and the past matter. And this is the domain of institutional and evolutionary economics, founded on the ideas of Thorsten Veblen and today expounded by economists such as Ha-Joon Chang. Bringing all these worldviews together creates a rich and complex picture, and the complexity can feel overwhelming. But surely recognising from the start that there are many complex resource flows contributing to human well-being is a better approach for economic thinking than the starting point of the circular flow of goods and money, which through its limited worldview risks missing some of the most important questions that economists and society need to be asking today. The point of this whirlwind tour through different approaches to economic thinking has simply been to make clear that there is no one economics. There are many, marked out by the different worldviews underlying them. I wish that I had realised this as an undergraduate. It would have saved me years of rejecting the economic worldview that I'd learned before I could discover that there were other approaches I wanted to embrace. So if you're studying economics, I suggest you think about what kind of economics you're interested in studying and how that should be informed by your own evolving worldview. This list of economics branches is very crudely divided into the traditional approaches on the left, which are predominantly those taught in universities, and the more heterodox approaches on the right, which often find it harder to get a voice in many university departments, but which I, like many others, believe have a lot of insight to offer the economist's toolkit if we are to economise well in the 21st century. That doesn't necessarily mean discarding all the old for the new. In fact, pluralism, the recognition of many simultaneous perspectives, may be essential and inherent to economics, and I'll discuss why in the third and final section.